Okay, and it's session starts in 4, 3, 2, 1.
Go ahead and mute, Amar.
Okay. Hi, folks. Sorry for the technical difficulties. My name's Chuck. We got through one question before we were online, so we'll do a quick recap. So I'm Chuck. I run identitypending.com. It's a digital marketing agency that helps new businesses get found online. Daniel and John are here with me today to speak about building equitable pathways to entrepreneurship. So Daniel and John, would you be comfortable just reintroducing yourself real quickly, and then we'll jump back into where we were in the discussion?
More than happy to. So I'm Daniel Abrams. I run Masslight, which is a specialized investment firm that focuses on early stage startups. We invest both cash and software engineering teams into those startups. Our typical initial check size is around 100K. And we also work primarily with non-technical and other underserved founders by providing them teams of engineers and product folks to help build, launch, and scale their initial product, typically prior to their first funding event. It looks like we may have lost Chuck, so I think we'll just hang out for a minute or two until we get him back. Actually, while we wait, John, would you like to do your introduction?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, hey everyone, I'm John Rush, and I'm a founder of a company called MarsX. So we're building a dev tool to help people who want to build products like SaaS or platform web. To do faster. Yeah, to do it faster. So we are targeting the communities who are usually not able to access or funding or like willing to validate their ideas at a lower cost and at a shorter time. So are we?
Okay. Hi, sorry about that.
Chuck, we managed to complete introductions while you were away, so I think we're...
Beautiful. Okay, we're back on track. we were doing so well before we were broadcasting. Okay, so the basic structure of this is we are going to answer a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up at the end for a Q&A session. So the first question we already went through, as I had asked Daniel what the biggest barrier to entrepreneurship was, and he had said that the primary barrier was capital. And that later he'd love to discuss how folks can use storytelling to build traction for compelling pitches to the VC community. So I'd love to hear John's answer to what the biggest barrier to entrepreneurship is, and then we'll talk about overcoming those barriers.
Yeah, so like from my experience, I think there are multiple barriers, but the one at least I've is the actual fact of our actual work on building software. Like, coming up with an idea, and then coming up with a little funding is usually not that as complicated as actually building and implementing what you want to build. And very often, the startups I see end up never building what they wanted or never launching. Just building and building and building, but never launching because it's very complicated. And in this world, most people who way of doing it, and they might just fall into the So most startups often a very complicated process, like they spend a year or more to build their stuff, and that's the barrier. That most people don't have a year. Like most people build their startup either on their own savings or they get a little angel money into the company, and then where I would like in most cases. And then what's the best way to reduce the barrier? I think is to reduce it. Like if it takes less time to build the stuff, then you have less barrier. Then you can take a risk that you can take time off from your job, or you can use your savings and launch this stuff. So.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And a lot of the times we'll see people put things out or spend a lot of time building in secret without validating that this is something that people actually need or want. So I agree that getting a basic product out there to start testing faster is a great way to overcome that barrier. And Daniel, you brought up something interesting earlier, which is that when we're pitching to VCs, you can use storytelling to build traction. And you also mentioned gathering the materials that VCs might want to see. Can you speak to that a little bit more?
Sure. When VCs go to listen to your pitch and analyze the potential for investment in your startup, there's really only 5 or 6 things they're looking for. So they're looking for how you came about with your estimates of the addressable market, for example. And when we review a lot of pitches ourselves prior to having our startups in our portfolio go on to make VC investments, so we have a pretty good sense when we look at these startups that has there been much thought into the addressable market? Is it realistic? Is the story that this startup is telling us a realistic one about the addressable market size, and is it large enough? We're looking at traction. So it's pretty surprising, but when we look at startups that are pre-revenue, pre-product, come to us, we feel like we can make a pretty good prediction about the ones that are going to be able to go on and successfully raise institutional capital. And we can do that because there's a lot of effort and success that you can have even in advance of a product in terms of gathering traction to indicate that there's a market for your product. So do you have LOIs with potential customers? Do you have early commitments of other types to indicate that that there are going to be users on the product, preferably paying users when you launch? So we could go into more detail about kind of the 5 or 6 different things that VCs look for, but I think the biggest one is probably traction. So understanding what that means in your particular market. In some cases, that's simply revenue, and it's fairly straightforward. In other cases, it's different types of engagement. So for instance, we work with a lot of health tech startups. And in the health tech space, the VCs who are doing those investments in later rounds are not actually looking at revenue so much as patient engagements and patient records on the system. So it varies a little bit by the vertical market that you're in. But understanding how you can position yourself to tell a story about the traction that you're going to have and how you're going to scale in a really quick and sizable way are really critical, and that's what they're looking for.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You used a term called LOI. Can you tell me what that term is? I've actually never heard that before.
Yeah, so we mean letters of intent, memorandums of intent. So what you're trying to do, early stage founders are in a funny catch-22 where they're trying to demonstrate that there's organizations who are committed to their product in advance of ever having a product at all. And that's a really hard thing to do. You have to go out, speak with potential customers, and convince them to sign a contract with you effectively. And in some cases, if you're really, really good, that contract is a commitment for capital. So they say, we're going to be your first customer. We know you're going to solve a pain point that we have that's so critical that in exchange for us helping shape the platform, we're going to commit to writing a check. And that's amazing, but it doesn't happen all the time. And you can ratchet it back from there and say, okay, even if I can't get them to commit to signing a check, can I get them to commit in writing to just using the product? And so one of the things we look for when we assess traction of a pre-revenue, pre-product company is the level of commitment. And it's interesting, we use a 1 to 10 scale, and 10 of 10 is having signed commitments for paid usage of the product when it's launched, which is really hard to get. But what's I think more interesting is the difference between verbal and written commitments that involve no capital, no guarantees. So if we have a startup that comes to us and says, yeah, I've talked to a bunch of customers and they've verbally committed to using the product when it launches, that's worth about a 2 out of 10 for us. But if the same startup comes to us and says, yep, we have signed commitments, but there's no obligation, no cash, they've simply signed on to run a pilot, to us, that's worth about a 7 or 8 out of 10. And so getting those sorts of signed commitments is super valuable to early stage startups. It's super valuable to us in making investment decisions, and it will be super valuable to later stage VCs as well.
So then to help me understand that scale a little bit, let's say there's a product I'm really excited about that is in development. If I sign up to be on their beta waitlist, is that a way of sort of lending some credibility when they're trying to fundraise?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly partially there. We look at the degree of commitment, right? So if you have and who the target market is. So if you're targeting a general consumer market and you have a landing page with a wait list and you signed up 100 people, it's a big difference than if you signed up 30,000 or 50,000, right? On the other side of things, if you're a B2B SaaS product, let's say, it's not necessarily large numbers. You may have only signed up commitments from 3 or 4 customers, but we're looking at the scope of the pilot. So has the customer agreed to roll it out, even if it's unpaid, across their entire enterprise? And how big is their enterprise? Or is this a limited pilot? If it's a limited pilot, what's the degree of commitment? Have they agreed to do this for 3 months versus 6 months with 10 potential users? So the relative degree of traction and the type of traction, which is specific to the vertical market that the startup is in, is important.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. That's good stuff. I'm writing a lot of this down. A quick thing I wanted to say about barriers to entrepreneurship and overcoming those barriers. Something I've noticed in my own journey is that there are so many tools that you can use that sometimes evaluating that many tools takes months. And so one of the barriers I'm trying to address is I'm documenting all of my evaluations and putting them out there for other people to see, so that, you know, if they're doing something similar to me, they can see what I use for project management, what I use for contracts. And it can be really overwhelming, especially if you have other commitments, you're trying to do something on the side to just evaluate everything out there. And it sounds like what John is doing is addressing a lot of that by sort of consolidating those choices and making building blocks. Do you care to speak to that at all, John?
Yeah, that's true. So now it all comes from my own problem. As you know, I experienced the same issues being entrepreneur in my previous startups, where my first startup I came in, I didn't know anything, so I just went on internet for every decision I had to make, like, you know, what language should I use for this particular area? Like, I was building a B2B software, and there has to be something what most people use there. And then the next thing, like, how should they do the design? Like, how should they build the front end and database? So there were like a lot of technical decisions about what to use and what kind of libraries and languages to use. And you know, the problem with that kind of choice is that in order to make good choice, you have to really evaluate things yourself for your own project, and you don't want to do that. You want to actually build your stuff. You don't want to just play with 10 tools to figure out which one is the best. So you end up just saving time and picking whatever you find, like first or second or third. And then at the end, like I remember after a year, we realized that the database we picked was not good enough for this kind of data. Now, the front-end library we picked was not good enough for this kind of complicated UX, etc. So we had to redo a lot of the things. But that was kind of fun. But then I moved to my second startup where we had to repeat the whole thing again. But I knew some stuff, so I brought that knowledge. And then I brought that knowledge to the next and to the next startup. But then whenever I saw others doing that and being at their first startup, I felt like they're going to go through the same journey. And then the idea came into my head that I have to make a tool that lets people use best practices while building their startup. And it's not about the information, but it's more about the tools themselves. Like, for example, if you're building, let's say, social network, and then you want to have a chat in that, right? All networks have chats. And then building good chat is really complicated. And there are like 100 ways of doing it. Like, there's a book just about how to build a chat, probably. So then what I want is I want to just pick the chat from Facebook, for example, or from WhatsApp, because I know it's good. I'm using it. It's like very well run. And then same thing goes for other things, such as a blog or a profile page or a login page. So the idea was that what if we just take all these best practices that are very, very common for almost like 80% of the projects usually share 80% of the features. Like that's what we figured out. And then the developers and the builders could just reuse that stuff and only spend their time and effort on the things that they have to build from scratch, the unique stuff, or they would just take big stuff as a basis and adjust it, change it to the way they want, and then they save a lot of time. So all of this was very useful. So I started using it myself in my next projects, and time went from like 12 months to 1 month. Like so the average project takes 12 months to build, and here you might spend 1 month or 2 months. And then again, coming back to the barriers, like what we've seen after that. We've seen that a lot of people who use our platform are the people who wouldn't be building the stuff otherwise, because they knew that they didn't have enough money. So I remember I met a guy who was looking for funding for like 6 months and not building. And I asked him, why are you not building this stuff and looking for funding? And he says, I went to the dev shop and they said it cost 250,000 to build. And I don't have that money. So I'm looking for investor money. And I'm saying, like, you can't really get investors to invest into your startup until you build something. And then there's a gap there, right? And then tools like ours, and there are tools like that on the market, help quite a lot to the founders who don't have a lot of money and a lot of time to build this stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And for especially people who might have some sort of technical ability, but are maybe not, a full AWS, expert or something like that, having a low code solution to at least get something off the ground or a proof of concept is a really great way to remove that barrier for folks, I assume globally, who have, who are trying to build things.
Yeah, I would not exclude the non-technical founders as well from here. Why? Because it's very often like we see the cases where there are non-technical founders who work on a day job, and in the evenings they work with the startup and the weekend, and they save some money from their main salary, and they hire a freelancer who works part-time and who's building this stuff. And that's a very good model, because you don't have to risk the whole life there. Like, you're still working, you bring some money, like a couple of thousand months, and then somebody's building that, and you validate certain things. And we have cases like that where people ended up building something what gained traction, and then they can go to the accelerators or incubators and get accepted there, or to investors, and then they leave their jobs and move there. So the non-technical founders benefit a lot from this as well, just because it's just cheaper to hire a freelancer for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely exciting to see those, walls coming down, and people who, especially at the speed at which we need to innovate these days to solve really critical issues, the more we can get people over those technical barriers, the better. And so that brings me to my next question. I'll start with Daniel for this one. What do you see as the future for technology in this space, especially software development? And what do you feel that means for non-technical founders?
In a lot of ways, the startups that we work with, what I see as emerging areas of opportunity are companies that are really a hybrid between a technical solution and, in one way or another, a non-technical solution. To put it in concrete terms, when we work with clinical organizations in the health tech space, there's typically a group of clinicians on the back end of the software that we build. So it might be a group of physical therapists, it could be physicians, but the software is actually kind of an enabling piece. So it's necessary but not sufficient for the startup to be successful. And we find that to be true in a lot of different industries, that there's this opportunity to take business activities that already exist, but make them more efficient with the application of software without necessarily removing the human element from the factor. And so that's an area that we're particularly interested in, and I think there's an opportunity there.
Thank you. Yeah, it's going to be really exciting to see the kinds of innovations that come up. I always feel like I get surprised every year by new solutions that people come up with. John, what would you say you see for the future of software development, especially for non-technical founders?
I think there was never a better time than now to build software for non-technical founders, or to run the companies that build it, just because there's so many things to be built. Like, there are a lot of big stuff built now, like Google and Facebook, but there are a lot of micro solutions, or people call it micro SaaS. I discovered this indie maker world recently. These are the indie makers, or the people who build a startup that will make 50K a month and 500 a year. So they're not planning to build a unicorn or something huge, and that's big stuff, because there's so many little things to be built in little communities. For example, like in the countries, in the cities, there are a lot of stuff. Like now we're working with one girl, and she's from London, and they're building something specifically for their city, and it's very small. It's not going to scale to the whole world, but it'll be very useful there, and it can make money for her. And I think in this world, where there will be a lot of little solutions built locally in different places rather than these global things, it's very important that the tools become very, very simple to use. And what we think is going to happen is that there will be a lot of tools targeting specific areas or niches. For example, a dev tool that helps people who want to build hospitality startups, or dev tool for those who target, the taxi business and things like that. And there are a lot of verticals like that, like hundreds or thousands of them. And now, the only solution there is usually white labeling solutions, or you have to go to the custom solution. But we think there has to be something in the middle, like almost like no-code or low-code solutions for specific areas, like for flower business. There has to be a solution for flower business, so that whatever you want to do around that, if that's your passion, you have some tool set, and you can add some stuff on top of it. So that's where we see the future going, like a lot of different solutions that simplify development for certain verticals, or micro verticals.
Yeah, and I think that really ties into what you said earlier about how 80% of the problem to be solved is the same for most businesses or applications, and there's a small amount of customization on top of it. So having almost like a template that people can run off of, I think we're seeing templates get more and more advanced every year, and I think it's going to become even simpler probably in the next 5. From here, we have 2 more questions, but only 15 minutes left. And I know we wanted a Q&A session. So I'm going to ask one more question. And during that question, I'm going to invite the audience to start putting Q&A questions in the chat. And we'll see what we can get to in the time remaining. So the next question on my list is, how do you feel that newer entrepreneurs, especially in the technical space, and especially in communities that are typically, not represented in technology and business, how can we overcome the challenge of feeling like we don't belong, or, just a lack of role models in general?
I can start. There's not an easy answer to that question, in the sense that a lot of the existing venture capital and startup infrastructure does feel like it's focused on they have a fixed view of what they think a startup should look like, what they think a founder should look like. So I do think that's a really difficult thing to grapple with. One thing I think helps, at least helps the founders that we work with, is a really tight focus on the community that they're actually serving and the problem that they're solving. So to think of it not so much about going out and raising VC money and not fitting in. That will come, and they will have to deal with that issue. But initially, the single most important thing you can do is understand and validate that there's a real problem that you're trying to serve, and then focus on the people who have that problem and how you're helping them. And what we found with founders is that, one, that's just a very gratifying place to be. So if you have a solution and you're out there in the market presenting the solution, and you're hearing from the users and customers that you really care about, that it's every day, it's making their lives better, that makes it very easy to get up the next day and keep digging and keep working on solving that problem. So I think that's probably the best advice I can offer is put aside the distractions, put aside what people think that you're supposed to look like, and focus on the users of your product who you're really trying to serve.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can say for myself, I do put myself out there a lot online as an educator for social media and digital marketing. And part of why I do what I do is I was frustrated that there was nobody who looks like me, nobody who talks like me, no one I could relate to in that space. And I realized there must be tons of other people who feel that way. So I decided to become that person that I couldn't find. And I've found that it attracts tons of people who are so grateful that, they can work with a business coach who's not going to misgender them, or who might understand, disability accommodations or parenting. And then I also do get a lot of, trolls and people saying mean things to me online, but that counts as engagement in social media. So I just, toss it back at them, or sometimes I even engage with them and end up creating new followers out of it. So I would say it can be really tough to build up a thick skin to the things people will say to you online. But I always encourage people to be yourself so much, especially if you're silly or ridiculous. And if people say you're ridiculous, you've already set that for yourself. So you're free from that judgment. But yeah, I would say I'm extremely passionate about getting really successful, so that in 10 years, 5 years, when there's a 20-year-old starting their first business, they can see someone who looks like them, tattoos, purple hair, trans, whatever, and say, well, that person did it, so I can do it too. And I think we all have to get rich so we can buy our friends' gay art and invest in our friends' gay businesses. And I just want us all to win really, really bad. So yeah, I'm super passionate about that. John, what would you say about people who might feel like there's not a space for them, or who might not have visible role models?
Yeah, I think that makes it difficult, but the good side here is that if you look at the change that's happening in the startup scene, is that now, there are a lot of startups that are being built, and you don't even know who is building it. It's very often. Today, I read this news that Figma has been bought by Adobe, and I went in to read who made Figma, and that was interesting people, interesting stories. So I think my advice would be this: do not try to copy someone, but actually try to build something very, very useful for very few people, and they're gonna love you. Whatever you look like, whatever you do, whatever country you live in, and because now so many people try to not build the startup, but be the startup founder. And that's often a different thing. Being startup founder is more of a lifestyle where you go to the places and network and all those things, but often you forget about building the startup. So I think if people start from the core, they start from building something, and usually if you do something useful, people really like it, and they give respect, and they start supporting you, and I think that's probably the way where it doesn't really matter anything about you. It's just important, the results of your work, and I think that will later on prove the other part, that it's not important your background or your gender or anything about you. It's just important that you actually put your idea and your product in front of you. So it's not about you, actually. Often it's about your product, and then it's about your customers, the product, and then you, not the other way. So that would be my advice. Just do not try to start from the other side of the journey.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that starting with focusing on your customers and what you're offering to them more than whether or not you belong in the space is a really great way to, if you do have self-esteem or self-consciousness coming up, just to focus on, this is the problem I'm solving, this is why I'm doing it, and let yourself belong by doing the work.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think there's infinite conversations to be had around all kinds of social and financial barriers that affect different groups, but that's probably a whole other discussion. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A. I just want to open the floor really quickly before I jump into our final question. Anybody in the chat have anything that they want to ask or add to the conversation before I ask our final question? Gonna give it 10 more seconds. Okay, well, if anything comes up, please feel free to ask. Also, you can definitely connect with me on the internet, Chuck Openspire. I'm sure you can connect with these two humans on the internet if you want to ask us other questions after this. But the last one, any top takeaways from your evaluations? Emily, the big ones for me are, and I'm in the marketing space, so my problems or my solutions are very marketing based. If you're going to do any kind of cross posting on social media, I highly recommend Metricool. I really love Honeybook for invoices, contracts, and tracking projects. I'm using ClickUp recently for project management with my agency. And I love Squarespace for building websites. I'm obsessed with Squarespace. They're my favorite of all time. I've been using them for 10 years. And if you're just trying to get a simple website up, it can look really clean really quickly. And okay, and then Emily had the question for John. What is the MarsX business model?
Well, I did quick. So the business model there is that we want to enable the ecosystem where the people who want to focus on building the micro apps can do it full time and actually make money on it. So very often the people who build, the developers who build those things, they are volunteers. They do it for open source projects and nobody pays them. They get some donations and that's not driving them too far, so they usually quit. So the model here is that on the one side there are developers who build the micro apps and perfect them and keep updating them, and on the other side we have the startup founders who just buy those micro apps and use it in their project. So basically, but they buy on 1/10 of the price. So for example, if the chat would cost you 50,000 to build, and then somebody has put 50,000 in there or even more in a couple of years of time, and then you just pay a couple of $100 for that because there are a lot of people like you who buy it. So basically one thing is being built once and being maintained and improved, and a lot of the others just buy that. It's like music, like you listen to music and a million people listen one song, so they don't write song per person, right? So and we have basically commission on that marketplace. So that's the simple model.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, basically it's like a platform where you can log in and you can see all these different components that might comprise an app, and then you can sort of plug those all into each other, and that they're being maintained and improved by based on the best practices at the time.
Exactly. Not by us, but by other businesses who do living on that. So they make living on that. That means that it's a lot of time put specifically into every micro app.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm excited to check that out. Okay. Good point, Emily. Okay, so I think the final question we have for our last 4 minutes, and this is kind of a quick runway one. We can start with John this time, since I've started with Daniel a couple other times. In 2 minutes, what's your best advice for getting a product off the ground if you have no money and no CTO?
Oh, that's the question everybody wants to know answer for. I think the important thing here is that if you don't have CTO, you don't have money, first of all, do not tackle something what's impossible to build without money and CTO. Because very often, now, do not try to build a rocket or electric car. But if you're not trying that and you're trying to build something not that complicated, then try to find one most important feature in there and build that using a no-code tool or find ready-made tool, whatever. It can be ugly, it can look a bit different, but very often, you have to just compromise on that. You just have, you have to take what you have, and if that's valuable enough, it's not like the color of the thing will define whether people like it or not. Like very often, you're going to ask people who like you to try it, and usually they will close their eyes for all the not functioning stuff. But the stuff that functions has to work, and you can validate whether that works or not. For example, if you're building, the Figma store is great. Like they were building this, the editor for the designs, and the key thing they were validating at the beginning is the collaboration, because there was Photoshop and other tools where you could build crazy stuff, right? But there were no tools where you could build that designs and share a link to each other. So the first thing they made was a very simple tool where you could just have some basic stuff, but you can share the link, and they saw people sharing the link, and that gave them motivation to continue to actually make advanced editor. If they started with editor, they would just have to burn a lot of money before they went to validate the actual idea, which was the collaboration and the links.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like take bite-sized chunks that you can handle at the beginning and build from there.
Yeah.
Daniel, what would you say to the same question? How would you get off the ground if you had no money and no CTO?
Yes, manually. And what I mean is, there's nothing that an investor would like to hear more than you come to me and say, you know what, I cobbled this solution. My back office is Google Sheets. My front office is this website. I have like 20 paying customers on there, and I'm on my wit's end because I have 50 more customers lined up. And the solution I cobbled together, I just can't handle them. Like I'm doing everything I possibly can manually, and I've reached the limit of what it's possible to do by cobbling together a solution from these existing products. So that is a really, really compelling story. And in most cases, there's some set of things that you can do, even if it's suboptimal, even if it looks ugly, that you can do manually to prove out your business and start serving your very first customers. And if you're able to do that, one, you'll simply learn a lot about your business and serving those customers. And two, you will have a really good story about the reasons why you actually need cash and validation that there is a business there, that there's a there, and you just need that additional funds to move beyond the scale that you're at and be able to take the next steps.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really good advice too. Is like it doesn't have to be pretty, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you can validate that people like what you're doing, then you can iterate from there. Okay, so I think we're getting close to the end of our time. Daniel and John, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you all of the attendees for listening. Emily for asking some questions. I would say feel free to reach out to me or anyone else if you want to keep connecting. And good luck out there.
Thank you, Chuck. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to end the broadcast. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.